Brothers and sisters, as I mentioned before Mass began, that this is World Mission Sunday, and during this Mass, I will be using prayers for a special Mass for the evangelization of peoples, which is a Mass that one can use for World Mission Sunday. And today I'd like to talk to you about a woman who was beatified in Lyon, France this past year, in May of this past year. And her life has a significant connection with today's World Mission Sunday. The name of this woman who was beatified was or is Pauline Jaricot. Now, Pauline Jaricot was born in 1799 and she died in 1862. Pauline was one of many in a family, and her family was one of the silk industrialists in France. They had a lot of silk factories and had made a great fortune. She grew up well cared for. She also grew up as a very attractive young lady. She wore the finest dresses. She, I understand, was a very good dancer and had quite the personality to attract the young men of her day. And in fact, she enjoyed all of the young men paying attention to her. One day, when she was 15 years old, she was reaching for something in her closet and she fell off her stool. And as a result of this accident, she had began to experience severe, debilitating pain in all of her body. No one could figure out why this was. She didn't break any bones, but yet she just hurt and hurt and hurt and could not move. Fortunately for her and her situation, she was able to leave Lyon and go out to a country estate that the family had in order to recuperate. And after about 8 months, she seemed to return to health. She returned to the old normal of her life. She began to don her fancy dresses. She began to go to balls again. She began to attract the attention of young men, to the point of even becoming engaged to one of them. Yet, this old normal was not normal for her. She had begun to notice that after she would return home from one of these social soirees that she enjoyed attending, that she began to cry, that there was something different about her now since the accident. And in this place that she was noticing in her life, one Sunday, after attending Mass, she decided to renounce all of her wealth. She sold all of her fancy dresses. She sold all of her jewelry. She started to wear very plain clothes. I understand she had a very plain-looking purple dress that she actually hated, that she would wear all the time. And in spite of the encouragement of her family to return to the old normal, she continued in this new normal and began to pay attention to those who were poor in Lyon. She actually started to reach out to the other young women who were about her age, 15, 16 years old, who didn't have life as well as she did. and she was able to give them a job in one of the silk factories that her brother run. And as they began to have a little better life, they began to meet together in small communities and began to pray. Another brother of hers was a priest. And from this brother, she learned of the needs of evangelizing foreign lands, of building new churches, establishing new parishes in many countries, Asia and here in the United States. And they needed money. So what she did was she turned to these poor young women that she had helped and asked them to pray every day for the missions, and once a week to give a penny of their of whatever it is of their earnings. And so she started to do this, and she started to accumulate some money for the missions. And this became such a good idea in her mind, and she had such organizational skills that she was able then to organize other people to just reach out to 10 people, just 10 people, and ask them for whatever they could afford. And in her organizational ability, she started to gather small amounts of money throughout all of France, that she was then able, through her brother and then through others, to help support the missions in foreign lands. Now, people became suspicious of her, nonetheless, least of which was the church. The church officials said that she was doing the business of the church and that she should stop it. Little did they realize that she was a baptized lay woman of the church. She was doing the job a layperson in the church ought to do. And yet the church was upset at it. People, because of her success, would say things. You can imagine what might be tweeted about her if she lived in this day and age. And so she decided to turn over all of the management of this to a board of directors. And she also then, even later on, turned it over to the auspices of the Holy See. And this brilliant idea that come from a 16-year-old laywoman became what is known today as the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, which we as a church support on World Mission Sunday. She had some other brilliant ideas. Some of them took effect. Some of them led to her ruin. She had this brilliant idea, probably in her mid-20s by now, of creating a community where factory life would be more just, where people would have a better place to live and would have better working conditions, beginning in the silk factories of her family. Well, people took advantage of her and left her in financial ruin. And she spent most of her life begging in official ways, with permission of the church, begging and begging and begging to pay off all of these debts, which she was unable to do. And interestingly enough, this Society for the Propagation of the Faith, on her own behest and on behest of the Pope, would refuse to give her any kind of financial support. She died for health reasons. She was a very slender and attractive young woman, and by the time she was 60, because of the sicknesses that she had been dealing with and with all of the stresses of financial problems, she put on a lot of water weight because her organs were not working, and eventually they were what led to her demise. And yet, today, some of her brilliant ideas are still taking hold in the church, yet she wasn't really recognized for her successes in her life and was probably more remembered for her failures. Today, Jesus speaks in the gospel about a successful Pharisee and a failing tax collector. Both prayed as they ought. Jesus had nothing to say wrong about how each person prayed. In fact, that's the way they were supposed to pray. Jesus also didn't say anything about he didn't say that what the Pharisee did in his moral life was wrong, nor did he say nor did he judge the morality of the tax collector in a life that he probably lived, which was probably not so moral. But what Jesus did cast judgment on was the attitude of their prayer. For the Pharisee, though praying correctly, though being thankful for God, was really praying because he was able to do all of these things himself. And it says that he is praying to himself. Now, it could have meant that he was praying, to himself, or he was really praying to himself and not to God. Whereas the tax collector knew that he needed help, knew there was much more space in his life for healing, needing for more space in his life to move from things that he couldn't help doing to doing greater things. And he knew that this was only possible through the mercy of God. Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. Echoing the prayer that we say as the church, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. My brothers and sisters, as disciples who are called from our baptismal calling to share the gospel of the Lord with all those we meet, to evangelize everyone that we encounter by the mercy of God, we first need to recognize that we need mercy. We need to know the mercy of the loving God, like this tax collector. Pauline Jaricot began her young life as a Pharisee, but through the grace and mercy of God, she donned a life of a tax collector, depending upon God's mercy. In all of her failures, in all of her financial ruins, she persisted to beg and to work, depending upon God in her prayers and her prayer to the Blessed Mother. Thank God for you and for me, for Pauline Jaricot. Thank God for you and for me, for the mercy that God extends to us, that we are then able to share with others. Thank God that through Jesus Christ, we are saved from our great successes, lest we become too snooty and be healed in our failures and be redeemed and saved by them.